And welcome. This is the 37th call we've had now for the Wharf Project, and we'll be kind of following our normal cadence of just some updates over the past week, what we've been up to, and then move into kind of some discussion topics. So, depending on if there's any back and forth on that. Um, Over the past week, we've been taking in a lot of feedback from people that are using the 1.0 releases. There's been some good usage of the SDKs and running into some bugs. So we've been focused kind of on resolving those. The one that's taken most of our time is this type issue with the contract kit and the generated code base. Um, when you would call when you'd load a table and get rows and whatnot from one of the generated contract kits, what it's supposed to do is actually type the responses for you and give you the proper row types. They were coming back as any, which is definitely not what we wanted it to be, because otherwise, you don't have any sense as to what fields are on those rows and what the data might exist in or should exist in those rows. So it wasn't exactly type safe. We've spent 2 days on it last week, and we've been working on it both yesterday and today. Uh, this week, we think we have a fix. It's in this PR. We have a little bit of stuff that needs to be done still. This has led to a new release of the contract kit. This is going to be, actually, it was just bumped up to 1.1 right before the meeting. It's a very, very small change that just shouldn't be backwards compatibility breaking if you're just using the contract kit. But what it does is just adds more generic typing and how that's being passed back and forth. For the command line tool to leverage, the command line tool, on the other hand, is going to have some changes that could break people that are using it. We had to, I guess, first of all, one of the things we had to do was change how all of the actions or the data types that we're creating are named. We were not even camel casing, we were capitalizing them before. Every time there was a break or a special character or something in the string, we were capitalizing it. So it was, the first letter of each portion of the string was uppercase. We're no longer going to be uppercasing anything. Everything's going to be lowercase, similar to the ABI. If you have a special character in the name of something, like a table or an action, it's going to be an underscore now. So that's another change that's coming. Both of these, if you have already generated code and are using it in your application through the command line tool, you're just going to have to do some renaming in the application. Hopefully, we won't have to ever do this again. This was all brought about because apparently you can have dots in your action or table names. The system contracts themselves do this. If you look at the power up table names, they have, I think it's like powup.state and powup.order were some of the table names. And those just were not working in this because we're translating them into JavaScript key names, as well as trying to match those as like interfaces and other types. So we had to have something that was compatible with the syntax in JavaScript. So those dots are now going to be underscores. I wonder if I can dig up kind of an example. The system contract should be an example of that. We have a generated version in our unit tests. Actually, if I just go to the file, that'll be easier to show rather than the diff, which is a mess. Table names. I think they are towards, actually, I can just search. Pow up right there. So in the table map, we still contain the name with pow up order, but you can see that this is now power up order, which is based on the struct type. All of the types that are exported also have this change. So these are all so it'll at least be a bit closer to the ABI. But again, if you have already generated code for your application and now you are moving to this next version of the CLI, uh, the names are going to be changing, the exports are going to be changing. So those will exist. We're also going to be exporting actions. These are getting renamed. The this is part of the review process we're doing right now. This is going to be action names and this is going to be table names, but they'll be exported so you can import them and use them in your application just to have an like a typed array of what the names are of both the actions and the tables in your contract. Right. You could also get this through the getter methods on the object, but these are going to be actual types that you can then use as opposed to the values. Complicated stuff, but and the changes we've made also do allow the table call now, which you can see that the generics extend that class. They will be returning the proper types now. The action call still is just going to return a generic action. If you still need the struct type or whatever, those are going to be, I wish I could collapse this. Those are still just going to be in the types export. I don't know. Types. My search is failing me. Should be right there. So if you still need those are still available through the types. It's just the naming within those will have changed. So hopefully, like I said, we won't have to do this again and break applications again. And this will be the naming pattern moving forward. So once this is released, which hopefully is going to be today, later today, you'll be able to upgrade the command line tool, regenerate your code. A lot of other issues have also been fixed. There were some ordering issues that JavaScript was complaining about, like when one struct referenced another struct and they weren't ordered properly. Like originally, I think they were just alphabetical order, but now you can see like activate, then key weight. It's because these are actually dependencies of things below, specifically of authority. So this has weight, permission level weight, key weight. And so all the ordering has been fixed. There's a number of other like linting type issues that have been fixed like this that will be in this new release as well. But as far as the testing we've done against all of the contracts that people have reported issues with, this is working now. It's fully linted and should not create any more errors. So excited to see how this works now that we're getting more adoption. We're starting to use it, or we have been using it for a little bit now in the tutorial application that we're building, and it's working pretty well there. It still has the bug where the tables aren't coming back typed properly, but we will get this release out before the tutorial is out, so that way that's not an issue. And throughout the video series that's coming with the tutorial, we'll be able to like talk about that a little bit. We'll like actually be able to work in the code for the tutorial code base and show that like your IDE now supports auto completion for what your table fields are, what your action names are, what your action data is, all that other fun stuff that the contract kit really helps surface and improve the developer experience. So yeah, that is the big update and what we have been focused on mostly being the contract kit and the command line tool, which will inherit this new contract kit implementation. In terms of other updates, I think we've made some minor changes to a few of the other libraries. The website is still getting more updates. We have more documentation on the way, even though there's already a ton out there. You can kind of follow along the tutorial client. It's not up to date. Like I have a bunch of local branches that aren't pushed yet. And yeah, we have also started working on the starter kit, which is kind of the last piece of the puzzle that we need to publish in terms of libraries. So that'll be coming soon. There'll probably be multiple flavors of the starter kit that are coming along with that. Our original vision for the starter kit was that it would have pre-established instances of everything that you could just use. But that's going to require these variations of the starter kit. And it might be chain specific. That I think is the way we're kind of leaning at this very moment. Like you could include a wax or an EOS starter kit, and then like the starter kit itself will instantiate the session kit, the contract kit, some API clients, a recommended set of wallet plugins, like for Wax, will include the Wax Cloud Wallet, and Anchor and Wombat, and the wallets that generally support Wax. And then for EOS, like if you use the EOS starter kit, it's not going to have the Wax Cloud Wallet because it doesn't work with EOS, but it will have Anchor and Wombat and Token Pocket and some of the other plugins. Sort of, whatever is appropriate for that environment will be in that starter kit. So there'll also probably be this generic starter kit that you can that is in this package right now. And it will be super generic. It will include, it's not going to export any pre-instantiated instances of anything, but it will just include all of the packages, all of the recommended packages. So that way you can just include the one thing if that's the route you want to go, and you'll have those packages as dependencies with one installation. Don't really know how useful that is, but it's we can't instantiate anything unless we instantiated everything, and I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. If you used the starter kit, it would then assume you are building a multi-chain application with everything, which I don't think that's where people are going to get started. Most likely they'll get started with a testnet or a specific chain. So kind of a weird situation to build around, but we think we have a decent way to do it, and feedback will definitely be welcome on that front. So yeah, that is the majority of what we've been working on. We're definitely open to feedback on any and all of this. It's been coming in slowly through private messages and directly in the WharfKit channel. We also have the discussion board, which isn't as active as I'd like to see. We all prefer Telegram because that's where we've lived for years. But maybe eventually that can kind of increase in traffic over time, because it's definitely a better repository of knowledge. It's going to be a lot easier to search than it would be to go into either the Antelope Devs chat or the WharfKit chat and search through message history. Telegram search is not the best. So yeah, that's basically where we're at. I did have kind of a topic of discussion if we wanted to dive into some not progress related things and things that aren't in the roadmap, or otherwise I'm kind of open. We have a rather small group today, but that's cool. And if we don't have a huge discussion on this here today, one thing I might do is raise this in the Antelope developers chat, this topic I want to kind of dive into. Yeah, and I guess I'll just kind of walk into that topic now. Do you have something, Chuck?
I was going to say, what's the topic?
It is retrieving data after you've submitted a transaction. Just adding a high level overview.
Nice.
It's kind of painful. Working on the tutorial application, which is just a simple to do. I don't have the code push, so I can't highlight it, but in the to-do app, you add a to-do item, you add an item to your task list or whatever, and then you have to, in your application code, essentially call get table rows again to update and retrieve that new table entry. And it's just you can't do it immediately. You kind of have to set a timeout for it to give the blockchain a chance to actually reflect that state. And it's a pain point in development that I think we could somehow address. So,
but you don't have to, if you're talking to the same API node, it will have the updated state as soon as you push the transaction to it, assuming it's not running lib or some other.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was doing it I had on one line of code, I was doing transact and I was awaiting it. And then on the next line of code, I was calling get table rows. And most of the time, get table rows called so fast that the state didn't actually exist to reflect the transaction that just completed.
I think that depends on how the API is set up. But if you're talking to the same API node you submitted, my understanding is it it should reflect instantly. But I do know there's different ways to run node that could wait till um, it sees it from another maybe node before it returns it. But I think the default setting of the API, you get it instantly. Like I have a lot of, say in the game when we're doing like a test, that was what was happening. As soon as you click submit, it awaits it and then fetches it back right away, like the updated info. So, but anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'm using our Jungle API for testing right now, and we are running on speculative, or whatever the default is on this sense. And if I do it immediately, it more often than not would not return it, like getting all rows. So I don't know. And if I add like a 500 millisecond timeout onto that call, it's there. Like it's calling so fast that I don't think the node even has a chance to respond with it.
Right, but I've seen that when you might talk to other nodes, but I haven't seen that on the same node. I do vaguely remember something like that where I had to add a timeout of like 100 or 200 milliseconds, just in case it's like not done with that block. Like there's still more information, so to speak, that's being applied in that block. Okay.
Yeah. And in the test scenario I was doing, it was a single node. It wasn't load balanced. It was talking to the same process, but it's still just like it would return the old data set. And maybe it's caching. I am not entirely sure. I know we do caching on our API requests, but it's not like I had called it before. But this, it's kind of a terrible design pattern that I'm having to repeat in this tutorial application I'm building, where I need to set a timeout in order to retrieve the data to make sure it's always there.
Right. There was discussion in today's Antelope developers call about potentially after instant finality and what have you, is to add like what they have in other protocols, which is some type of like event system into Node EOS, where you basically can, fire an event. The node can fire an event when, say after a transaction or something that would allow you to maybe automate that stuff. But obviously that's down the line.
Yeah.
Just thought it might be relevant.
Yeah, no, that definitely could be a solution. I mean, I know things like the fire hose could be another solution where, you submit your transaction and then you subscribe to table updates or something like that. But that's not native, and it's limited in availability essentially. And it would be hard to just build into something like Wharf because it's not pervasive throughout the ecosystem.
Right. It's not a dependency of Node EOS.
Right.
I think include Null's answer here in the chat is the correct one. This is a really good use case for return results, return values.
Yeah. It would be really nice if it just if the response could return any table deltas if there were any by default, just on the push transaction call, because then you could just look at those.
Yeah, no, that would be actually that'd be great. If you can get table row changes, which sometimes could affect 50 tables potentially, depending on what you're doing, what's the action. But if that could come back, maybe it's just because of the fact that it could return a ton of tables. Could be the issue why it's not enabled by default, but at least having the ability to request it through the call and the API supporting that would be amazing.
Yeah. When trying to build a reactive application, this is it's a pain point that I hope we can look at from the API perspective. And yeah, using return values is a good concept here, but expecting developers to, on every one of their actions, define these return values seems cumbersome, I guess.
Overkill.
Yeah.
Normally you want to use the return value say in traditional database or something, you want to return the row ID that gets generated automatically or something that you won't have access to through the state. is when you generally want the return value.
Yeah. And in this simple example I'm working in the tutorial, like I just want the application to be reactive so that way when the user types in a new item and submits the transaction, like it appears in the UI immediately. And one workaround I was going to try was to make it so that I just like the submit action does two things. Like I would add it to the local application state, and then I would, submit the transaction and just assume that the transaction succeeded. I'd maybe revert the application's local state if the transaction failed. But in this instance with this smart contract, I don't even have all the data because the data is created by the smart contract, like the row ID. Like I don't know what the row ID is when I'm submitting the action itself. So it's like I have to call get table rows right now, um, which in and of itself is kind of a pain. And then to add insult to injury, it's okay, that row doesn't even exist when I call it so fast. So there's
And it's
a pain point
also,
here.
and depending like how the scoping is done and how other things, like you might need to fetch many things. Like I'm not sure how you would automate that outside Node.js itself, giving you the delta of the table rows and potential other contracts that got their table rows changed, which is something I think only Diffuse maybe provides. I haven't seen it in others.
So yeah, I mean, I'd definitely love for this to. I don't think we can solve it at the SDK level by itself.
It's a post hook, isn't it? It's just like a post hook in a way.
Yeah.
You can do it in a way.
That was another thought I had. We have this, what is it? Callback. Oops, I should spell callback correctly. No, that's finality callback. What I was thinking about doing was making a plugin, a transact plugin that like a really simple one in the application that would make it so that whenever I performed a transaction, it would automatically fetch the table rows and update the application. So there's a little bit we can do on the Wharf level, to make this less repetitive for the developer.
But then you still have to call it yourself because it will differ for every application and what you actually need to fetch. So then might as well do like, you're already doing await. So then if you're doing instead of await like .then or just under the line of await, it's just here you're talking about adding the delay. So maybe like it's almost like what you might want to do is make that set timeout built in as an option of the transact, so that when you transact, you can have an option of like basically the await itself returns after the added milliseconds. You know what I mean? Instead of having another line and allowing an option to be set as default for that, for example.
I think that can be done. It's a little cumbersome, but you would transact plugins and then you could provide like a callback. And then there would be a callback. And this is where you do set timeout and your call. Like this should work currently in Wharf. Obviously, this function needs to be made. This right here would need to conform to the interface of a transact plugin, which is possible.
But if you do that, then you might as well write it as a promise that set timeout, and then just do after the transact like await timeout or await.
True. True.
And then wrap your session.transact in something that does both, for example, and use that like abstract function.
It'd be a lot better if I could just do get tasks or whatever here and wouldn't even need the set timeout. Like, but this set timeout, I think, is something that we can address at the API level at some point. I don't know. This, again, is... I thought about writing a message to the Antelope Devs chat and just being like, this is a design pattern that sucks. Let's find a better way to do this. But I don't even know if that's the right channel to raise this in. And this is going to require some sort of bigger effort, unless the answer is just to tell developers, hey, go rewrite your smart contracts and use return actions. Which maybe is the case. Maybe you because the return action value is just it's like a serialized whatever you want it to be, right?
Struct custom data with all the things you expect to return.
So could it just be a table row and then the struct would be the
Yeah.
same as, yeah? That would be
Yeah,
good.
and that has the added benefit that since it's part of the ABI, you actually know what the return structure will be. So you can automate things too.
I get.
And so going back to what you were saying before, it could be a wrapper around changes around the database. You could even return a before and after and return the pointer to the row of them if you so chose. You have full, ability to do whatever you want. I'm surprised to hear. I was always that if you used your node with speculative mode, then you didn't have to do that one time. Even though I personally have, as well, always waited the 7 or whatever it might be. I was sure that wasn't necessary.
I think the default might be head mode. That's what I think is the thing here. Maybe the default is head mode and not speculative mode. Because speculative, yes, it should include like both, the unconfirmed transactions as well, basically.
Changed. I do have a vague recollection of this. I wonder if it changed from speculative to head by default in the previous year or two.
Yeah, here you see you have head mode in read mode.
Yeah.
So head mode will wait until it's confirmed, and it will basically process the transaction, but it will not include it in the state, so to speak, when you query it. But if you change read mode to speculative, it represent the state as soon as the transaction comes in.
Yeah, which I believe is more punishing on the API node, especially if it's getting spammed. So I think the reason we use head is just for protection.
What Mel said in the chat is as well true. If you have some kind of load balancer, you're very unlikely to get the same node unless there's just one node behind the balancer.
Yeah, for sure. What we end up doing is actually like just offloading all that kind of stuff, right? Like if you're writing like some big application, what we end up doing is basically we have some other backend that is consuming Firehose directly every block, or you can write your own like different things for it, and then sends to the server that like, oh, this row in this table has changed, and then the UI itself can make that call to whatever API to fetch that updated row, and that way you never run into that kind of situation. Like like by the time like the Firehose sees it, although it's almost instant, but like there is a small delay, so maybe that's why we didn't run into it anymore. But yeah, definitely speculative should show it right away.
Yeah, and most APIs probably won't be running that, and it's a big ask to ask developers to build those kind of custom APIs, especially like in this instance, like I'm building a tutorial app, I don't I don't want to introduce that kind of complexity when I'm trying to teach somebody about Wharf, and so I'm kind of forced to use this hacky method.
Put it into Wharf, just like add a timeout for a second into every call.
Yeah, that would.
Or like if you chain something, if you do session.transact.fetch or some, whatever, like you chain it, then that chaining automatically adds the delay.
Yeah. I mean,
and then somebody can get an option to override that if they want to remove the delay. Maybe they're calling something that's not affected for some reason. I don't know why you would chain like some old state request.
Yeah, it's almost like, and I still think the solution by default we shouldn't do that, because otherwise, if there's no callback, then we're just making the user wait for no reason. So I do think that the answer is kind of some sort of plugin. And I suppose we could make a plugin that's like a delayed callback plugin that waits a configured amount of time and then, just performs the callback. That would be a pretty easy plugin to create.
But if you need instant like updates, so to speak, or the fastest possible, you would run speculative, right? Like even though you'll, take some additional load on your API server,
right?
It's the fastest way for you to get that information outside what you suggested earlier is knowing what changes will occur and kind of saving that local state and maybe showing it as like, like say if you have a to-do list, you show the new thing you added, like you just, change your current state in the app. But it's opacity like 0.5 or something until you get back the request, like you do the delay after it, you get back your request, and then it shows like without any opacity, for example. That will allow you to at least see it right away and potentially even keep the opacity until it's lived once instant finality is there and it's not a long delay.
Yeah, these are all just hard gotchas to explain to developers.
In all of this stuff or action results, I would definitely use action results.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that is the answer, is just informing smart contracts or developers who are building smart contracts to use those more regularly to improve their application flow. We didn't use it at all in the smart contract we wrote, which I think is out here somewhere.
But if you are getting like, if what you need is something you can't deduce, like a row ID, for example, then yeah, 100%. I think action return is meant exactly for that.
Yeah. I guess we will have to, maybe I'll ask Daniel to do that. He's been the one building this contract for the tutorial. Maybe I can get him to go in and add action return values that we can then use to really just create the most simple experience possible. So that way we don't have to do this. We don't have to call get, because we're loading the whole table every time. Like it's just a table call, which is also really inefficient. No, you cut out. What was up?
I also fell into that trap while doing videos because I think that we're so used to them, and I don't actually believe that way to develop smart contracts today, though it is still going to be needed if you're tapping into any old smart contracts that don't have that already, or if you're tapping into any third-party smart contract that you can't control the return value.
Yeah, that was another big impetus for this, was like, we do this kind of nonsense on Unicove where you submit a token transfer and then we wait a little bit and then we call get balance, or we call the get table rows on the balance or whatever, because we don't have control over the token contract. We can't just add action return values to it. Say with any other token contract that it interacts with as well. So I wonder.
Or you have control over the API if you talk to for speculative, for example.
True. It would mean we'd need to run like our own separate set of APIs beyond our public APIs for that specific application, which would not be great. Yeah. This
seems like a really good improvement to the token contract, just to return new balance.
That would be awesome.
We'll return both balances, I guess, right? Like where it's from and where it's to.
Like retroactively going through all of these contracts and figuring out what reactive type state would we want back as developers when performing this action. Like I even like update auth. Like I kind of want the account's permission structure back after I call update auth, to look at that kind of stuff. And I'm sure there's tons of other examples of this where improvements could be made. Because yeah, we have to jump through all these hoops, and it's not great. I mean, Anchor Desktop does this a lot as well, where it's like, okay, let's buy RAM and then let's call get account, and it's like, okay, oops, and they, Anchor users can point to on desktop, they can point to whatever API they want. So I can't control whether or not it's in speculative mode, and I want to show that they just bought RAM and it was successful, so that way they don't try again because they thought it failed.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a way to.
But just like on that topic of speculative and head having a more, or like speculative having more load on the API, I don't know if that's still the case with the whole now, like, multiple threads for read only, and like the fact that now in the new version, they're also going to have the auto OC, so that, well, that's not going to affect it much,
Right.
but they're going to have like, these like much less load on read only transactions, regardless of how they come, whether it's reading a table or something else. I wonder if it's not an issue anymore, and speculative is currently the default, and people might just have to, existing APIs might have to update that. But yeah, like I've also used that, obviously, like delay before. It's at least in testing, when you're testing things with public APIs and stuff. But it just doesn't feel right,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Raising awareness, though, about this being a pain point for application developers, like maybe there is an inexpensive way to just return what was impacted in state when you push a transaction somehow. So that way that could be interpreted without needing to define custom action return types. And if you want to return something custom, that's when you use the action return value.
And a lot of the work is already done, as far as I understand, because it's filled with DM logs, right? Like it's DeepMind already does that at every level. So, it's just instead of outputting to std out or whatever DeepMind is outputting, what it's creating is also piped back as part of the processed result.
Yeah. It would be super useful to have. And then, customize it if you need more. We could have send transaction 3.
At that rate, we're going to have send transaction 100 in a few years.
Right. We need to just start using the namespace that we have. We have v1 chain push transaction or send transaction. Like, well, let's just increment that version number instead of changing the name. Yeah, there's a lot of.
Yeah, but it's backwards compatible too, right? Like it's not breaking. You're just adding another, key value in processed, for example, or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's more the bandwidth, I guess, concerns if it grows, like where, we have some actions that affect many tables and across contracts. Especially, system actions will affect many things, like staking or something. It's going to affect so many different contracts. So I don't know if that like additional burden being automatically forced to be returned. So even if they enable it, it's going to be like a flag, I think, in Node EOS, and then you still can't guarantee that the API has it.
Yep.
Oh, here's another idea where, how we keep talking about this get info to or something to get more info. It's if we do have a get info, or like the one where get what the API supported API, I forgot what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
If that also tells us if the node is running in speculative or head, and then or a reversible, and then Wharf already knows that on the first get info call, and then decides to add a delay or not in a chained, get call that is changed to a transact, for example.
Yeah, and that is the get supported APIs call, I believe. But it would be super nice if that was actually part of get info. Like, we're calling get info constantly for, assembling transactions, and not having to do that additional API call to get supported APIs to determine what feature capabilities exist would be really nice. And that, I mean, we still run into some problems with that call, and that, the get info call might not be routed to the same node as the push transaction call, and all the load balancing issues still exist, but that's really up to operators to kind of solve. Like, I think we're even serving out just a custom JSON file for that endpoint, not even sending it to node EOS on our end, because otherwise it wouldn't be accurate, Yeah, this definitely is one of those things that warrants further exploration and how the APIs are used. And I think we wrote about this in the Wallet Plus paper when we were talking about these SDKs, is that moving to a position where we have SDKs where it's possible to do this kind of stuff is really going to lead to improvements that we're going to have to request from like the platform itself. Yeah, this is one of them, that's for sure. I really didn't like, as I was writing this application, that I had to keep doing these timeouts. Cool. Well, I think for the time being, I'm probably just going to leave these timeouts in it and probably talk about it in the video, and cite that this is an area for improvement. It's either that or we change the contract to add return values, but then I'd have to explain return values. I don't know. I'm trying to stay away from more complex topics in smart contract development when I'm just working towards Wharf, teaching Wharf, that is. So I don't know if you guys have recommendations, down for it. But yeah, I think it should be okay, but definitely should be improved. I don't know, maybe Leap 6, we can come up with something for it, since 5 is already close to done. But annoying that we have to do this, whatever you want to call it, this ritual. Cool. Well, I don't know that I had any other specific topics. This was just a random one that came up as the tutorial app was coming together. It works pretty well. It's not going to be pretty. It's kind of boring because it's a to-do app, but the application itself does really, show you, like, here, this is all you got to do. You can perform your transaction on your smart contract. You're good to go. But then we're going to tell you to call get set timeout with your retrieval of your table data, so that way your application can at least feel somewhat reactive. After the transaction completes, at least half a second later, the UI is going to update and show it. Cool. Was there anything else Wharf related anybody wanted to talk about today?
Yeah, sorry, I got disconnected, but no, that sounds great.
Cool. I noticed both you and Nathan disconnected and reconnected, and so yeah.
Yes, we're playing hide and seek.
Cool. Well, let's wrap this one up here. We will meet again next week. Next week may very well be the last weekly call we have, and then we can do them ad hoc or just hang out on the Antelope Developers roundtable that we now have every 2 weeks. Yeah, so it's awesome that the project's coming together, and we have a lot of good production ready code, and the community feedback has been awesome to help us track down this stuff, and we will continue over the next couple months just really refining what exists and trying to solve the problems that people are running into with these new SDKs. So cool.
Awesome. Till we meet again.
Yep. Thanks for joining, and we will all chat again.